Thanks for joining me today. February 14th this year was the usual Valentine's Day, with a day associated with romantic love, the color red, chocolates, and flowers. It was also Ash Wednesday, a day associated with ashes being placed in the sign of a cross on one's forehead. Now that's a very different vibe. But both stories are both about love. We're in a season called Lent, a period of 6 weeks leading up to what we call Good Friday, the crucifixion of Christ. And of course, Easter follows on the Sunday. Lent is a practice that is observed by Orthodox and Catholic Christians and a number of Protestant denominations as well. It was practiced by early Christians, and it followed the practice, you might say, that they used Jesus' experience in the wilderness as the 40 days to copy, to use it as a day to prepare for the upcoming, we might call it a celebration if you want, or recognition of what Jesus did for us at the cross. And we understand preparation. It's sort of a common practice. When we go to work, we get dressed. We prepare for work. We get dressed in our clothes appropriate for work. We'll gather our wallet or our purse and our car keys and our phone, have that ready to go, so when we walk out the door, we're ready to go. I was at the arena a couple weeks ago where I had a lady wave me down, and when I got over to her, she so excitedly told me about how she was going on vacation in a few weeks. She was going to Cuba. And then she told me that she had actually already started to pack that day. And so she mentioned that she had already started to prepare in anticipation of this upcoming event. And so we understand that idea of preparing in our normal lives, and I hope we can understand that we can use that and apply that to our spiritual lives as well, to create the space where Lent is that idea of preparing to create space to better appreciate the death of Jesus, what the suffering and the sacrifice, the great love that motivated that. And so we have this opportunity. Of course, people have, over the years, have fasted like Jesus did in the wilderness and prayed. Some engaged in almsgiving as well. And so that's one of the things that people do. There are other suggestions now that people would suggest. Some people would, instead of giving up food, they'll maybe give up for the whole 40 days, which is now that would be, many of us maybe can manage that one, but certainly people maybe give up a meal or two a day for that period of time, at least during the weekdays, so on, maybe not on Sundays necessarily, depending on what you want to do there. Some people give up fast food. Some people give up sugar. Some people give up things like alcohol, or other things like quite different from food, but they might give up grumbling or complaining for that period of time. And so there's this practice, right, that it's been going on for centuries to help one prepare. And it's something maybe that you want to consider doing to help you prepare. And to, for instance, if you give up a meal, to use that time that you would normally involve with preparing the food and eating it, to go and spend that time in prayer instead. We've been reading, of course, in the book of Mark, and Mark's been telling us about and introducing us to Jesus. And we've read about how Jesus was baptized, how he went into the wilderness and successfully did not give in to temptation. He began involved in public ministry, and then he calls these four men, "Come and follow me." And so they do. And of course, they are treated to something. I don't know if they had expected that or not, but it is something like I'm sure they had never experienced. Not to this degree. Jesus went to the synagogues and he was teaching, and people were amazed because of the authority at which he spoke. And then he was driving out demons. And now Jesus, it was not only authority over the scriptures or speaking like God himself, he was also demonstrating his power over the unseen world, the supernatural world, the spiritual world. And then he's healing people. And the crowds are gathering, and there's sort of this degree they're getting a little famous, and they're right in the ground floor with Jesus on this. This is amazing stuff. And then, of course, Jesus starts feeding people, like 4,000 at a time with a few loaves and fishes. 5,000, and then there was 4,000. And then Jesus comes walking on the water, and there's all these things that are happening. And wow. And then in chapter 8, Jesus is with them, and he says, "Who do people say that I am?" And they said, "Well, maybe John the Baptist, come back to life, or Elijah, or one of the Old Testament prophets." And then Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter speaks up for all of them and says, "You're the Messiah." Well, that is, you are the Christ, were the words that were given. You're the Christ. And Jesus warns them not to tell anyone. Why? Well, people were looking for a Messiah, right? A political leader to help them rebel against the Romans, set up their own political kingdom, to gain them political freedom. And this wouldn't have been the first time there's a history of that, of rebelling, and Jesus didn't want to get caught up in that. At this time, this was not Jesus' agenda. It was all about a spiritual kingdom, not a earthly political kingdom. And of course, the Romans knew about this, and the people in authority knew about this, and he didn't want that unnecessary negative attention. And then Jesus introduces them to the other side, you might say, what it looks like to follow him. And we read in Mark chapter 8, verses 31 to 38. We'll start reading at least. In verse 31, he then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. And Mark says he spoke plainly about this. He starts laying this out very plainly, not in parables, it's plain. He's going to suffer. He's going to be rejected. He's going to be killed. And then rise again in 3 days. Whew, I don't think they saw that coming. That was not in their plans. Yes, what they were doing, that was certainly might have felt a lot better than fishing, but now fishing might start looking a whole lot better. And we know that Peter doesn't take too kindly to this. And we read that Peter took Jesus aside and began to rebuke him. Right? One verse earlier, Peter's saying, "You're the Messiah," or the Christ. Sometimes it depends on the translation. You're the Messiah, you're the Christ. And next thing, what we have him doing? He's rebuking Jesus. Don't talk that way, right? What are you talking about? This didn't fit with Peter's plan or the disciples' plan or other people's plan, and yet this was exactly the reason for which Jesus had come. And Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan." Now that sounds pretty harsh. And he goes on to say, you do not have in mind, this helps explain this, right? You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. That at one level, Satan, he's up to his old tricks. Same kind of messages in the wilderness, right? You can have it all if you do it my way. You don't have to do it God's way. And of course, Jesus stays true, right? That his concern is God's agenda, not merely human concerns of what's comfortable or what seems expedient in the moment. And there's this call, right, that to focus on God's agenda, not merely human concerns or human agenda. And then we read, then he called the crowd to himself along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. Ooh. Whoever wants to be my disciple, you're going to be my follower, you must deny yourself. You must take up your cross and follow me. Wow. I'm guessing things got quiet. First of all, Jesus, right, he tells them that his death is necessary. Why? This messianic rule, the spiritual kingdom, begins not with a display of physical power, but with a solution for the original problem, sin. And Jesus is providing that solution, atonement for sin. And it begins with his blood being shed, that Jesus' death is the sacrifice that opens up this opportunity for reconciliation between God and humankind, right? It opens up the opportunity to partner with God, to be that original, operating as that image as they were intended to open up that opportunity for relationship. Now, it's true that we don't always understand what God's up to, and we have a very limited perspective. And Satan wants to discourage us from being connected to God and following God's agenda. Just as he was using Peter to try to discourage Jesus, we too will be. But Jesus' words, right, is that you have to deny yourself. You have to take up your cross and follow. That in fact, if you're going to focus on trying to save your life, you'll end up losing it. But if you actively let go of your life, your agendas, your desire to be on the throne, so to speak, and commit to doing what God wants, then you'll save your life. Now, that word deny, of course, especially in this Lenten period, right, we can think about self-discipline. We can think about self-sacrifice. Self-discipline, of course, is an important skill set that helps us in life. And I think there's lots of evidence for that, right? Self-discipline is that ability to say no to yourself. No to maybe immediate things that might seem to make life better and easier, but with cost down the road. Self-discipline allows us to take hold of something difficult and to forge ahead, maybe to make temporary or immediate sacrifices to benefit longer term. Now, of course, self-discipline is And it would allow us to create that time, as we talked about earlier, and some self-sacrifice to maybe give up a meal, or some of these other practices to save some time. Maybe first of all to create some little suffering, so you have an appreciation for that, but to create some of that self-discipline in your life for your own good. But the idea is not just to be self-disciplined in of itself, right? The goal is not about independence, and I want to make sure we understand that. It's so that we can live in partnership with Jesus, right? It's not about trying to get to this place where we can say, God bless my efforts in prayer. God bless, I've got this plan, God, I want you to bless it. Join me, God, in what I'm doing. So often our prayers seem to be that way, as opposed to the opposite way is, God, what are you doing? Where do you want me to join you? And be listening and watching, and then joining him in what he's doing. Right? To set aside the distractions, whether it's our own ideas or distractions like TV and screen time and other things that might get in our way of cultivating our relationship with him. But to set aside the distractions and the fears of what other people might say, or what it'll cost us, or if it costs us a little pain, but to set aside the fears and any of those barriers that keep us from developing a relationship with him. That he's calling us to abandon the things that are shiny, if you will, that are calling our name, that are promising instant gratification and instant happiness, things that never really deliver, and trade them, if you will, to give them up so that you can live a life to follow Jesus. You can join God in what he's doing and get to experience a life that Jesus describes as abundant life, life to the full. So I want to conclude by asking you to consider, to investing your life in following Jesus. Invest your life in following Jesus and what that looks like, and to explore maybe some of the ramifications and explore how you might more fully do that in this period that we call Lent. Thanks for listening.